So, very excited to have you. And once the shows go live, you can connect with us in the archives of Amazon Music, Audible, iHeartRadio, iTunes, and Apple Podcasts, MixLR, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, as well as Podbean, Podvine, Player FM, and YouTube. All you have to do is search Wake Up Call with Dan Tortora, or one word, Wake Up Call DT. So we look forward to seeing you on all of these platforms. We have a great show set up for you here today. I am honored and I am privileged to have the guests that I'm going to have here this morning. In hour number one, I'll be joined by Zack Mahoney inside of MonPazPopcorn.com's What's Poppin'. Zack Mahoney, Syracuse Orange quarterback alum. You know him from those Clemson and LSU bouts, and I know him as somebody who has always shown me and will forever be an example to me that it doesn't matter what people think you are, it doesn't matter where you start, it matters where you finish, and it matters what you believe is who you are inside of yourself. Zack Mahoney will always be somebody that lives on for me in a positive way, and he's a young guy. He's got plenty more time to inspire us, and I'm sure that he will, but he definitely inspired me back in the day. One of my favorite stories that I ever got to write is the story of Zack Mahoney, because we are who we believe we are, not who other people say we are. In hour number two, Papa Joe will be joining us for PGA Championship talk, Major League Baseball, and horse racing. So a lot of good stuff coming up in hour number two as Papa Joe joins us in his normal time on Thursdays from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. Eastern time. So with that being said, we'll start off hour number one here with Zack Mahoney. Zack and I are here to analyze the quarterbacks of Syracuse for 2023, as well as a bunch of the NFL rookie quarterbacks. You'll see them appear on the screen between Zack and I as we discuss them. The only reason why there's not going to be B-roll of them is because of the new fun internet rules. And no matter how many times you say, I don't own that footage, sometimes you get flagged for it. So I don't understand why. Some channels do, some channels don't. So we're going to put up the picture. You're going to see them. We're going to discuss them. Mr. Mahoney, how you doing?
I'm great, Dan. I really appreciate you having me on. It's always a pleasure.
Absolutely. So I'm excited to do this, excited to break down the quarterbacks. We're going to start with the Syracuse Orange stable of quarterbacks. And, of course, we're going to start with the starter that we know so very well, Garrett Shrader, and get your analysis of Garrett first.
Yeah, Garrett is, I think he's shown what he's capable of. He's a tough guy. He's been able to win big-time games with his arm, which I think, especially in the ACC in today's football world, you need to be able to do as a quarterback. I'm excited to see where he'll go with this team and this year, but I think as far as from a leadership role, there's no one better. I've heard nothing but great things on and off the field about him, so I'm excited that he's leading the Orange out there this year, and I can't wait for football to start.
What is it about his arm? What can you say about his play as a quarterback? Because he's heard for a couple of years, not from me, and sometimes I feel like I'm the only one that didn't say it, but he's heard for a long time, it's all about running. It's all about running. He's a running quarterback. He can't pass. What do you see from his arm?
I think the biggest thing is his timing. I think he's got a lot of trust in the guys that he's throwing the ball to.
Yeah.
Especially with where we're at in college football with people transferring and, your targets are leaving every single time. I think that'll be the biggest thing to see is how quickly can he get trust with some of the new guys coming in and playing.
Yeah.
I think his legs are secondary to his arm. I truly believe he's a pocket guy. He's very poised back there. He's not a guy who just puts his head down looking to scramble. He wants to make a play with his arm, and I think he's shown that multiple times over his career.
You said that his feet are secondary to his arm. Why do you believe that? With knowing that he can run and he could be elusive in that case, why do you believe it's still secondary?
I think in today's football, it has to be. I don't think you're going to be a Power 5 starter if you can't throw the ball. You take a look at the Purdue game, for example. The clock's running down. They need big plays. He's making big-time throws, deep throws, and accurately. And I think when you see someone do that, it's just how consistently can they do it. He proved it once, and obviously he is a threat on the ground. He's a big guy. I don't know many people that would want to tackle him.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, ACC football in this day and age, you got to be able to throw, and he's proved it.
When you see how he's handled the team the last couple of years. Has he been a ray of hope in your opinion? I mean, do you feel that Garrett Shrader coming to Syracuse, transferring to Syracuse, that this was something that has created a more positive, maybe the record doesn't show it, but do you feel like this is a better chapter for Syracuse with Garrett Shrader?
Absolutely. I think the biggest thing is stability and being able to, I know a tremendous amount of coaches had left after last season with the success. I think them being able to retain a lot of coaches that could have left, that stayed behind. I mean, having the same coach with you from year in and year out, I think is a tremendous mental relief, and being able to, I'm imagining they're probably going to run a very similar offense. There might be some tweaks that the new OC wants to put in, but at the end of the day, having a better understanding of the offense, having another offseason to get healthy and being able to just look at the upcoming schedule, because I think it favors Syracuse throughout the 12 games. I think when you kind of look down the line, there's no reason that they shouldn't at least make it to a bowl game. And I think the biggest reason for that is going to be Garrett's arm and his health.
Yeah, obviously his health's very important, and he's coming off an injury, from surgery and having his arm in a sling here recently. Your thoughts on that? I mean, any concerns on it? I mean, guys go through injuries all the time, and different surgeries happen and whatnot. What would be your concern, and what would be your advice to Garrett?
Anytime you're coming back from an injury, you just got to make sure that you're 100% healthy, both physically and mentally. If there's anything about you that is unsure of if I can make this throw or if I can do this, it really isn't worth it.
Yeah.
And I know, especially in today's game, there's no reason to rush back. There's no reason to try to put yourself in front of all these defenses. If you're not only going to be able to help the team, but you're eventually going to hurt your long run. And I think someone like Garrett, he's got, pro potential, and I think he needs a big senior season to show that he's capable of playing on Sundays.
What is it about Garrett Shrader, speaking here with Zack Mahoney, Syracuse Orange quarterback alum, as we break down the quarterbacks of the Syracuse stable for the 2023 season, as well as rookie quarterbacks in the NFL? What is it about Garrett that makes you believe that he could make an NFL roster?
I think just the toughness and the leadership that he has. I think when you take a look at some of the quarterbacks that have been drafted later in this draft class, the Stetson Bennett's or the Max Duggan, they didn't necessarily have the biggest arms, but what they did have was great leadership. They had great timing. They proved that they could play on a big stage. And I think Garrett has that opportunity coming up this year. And, if he's successful, there's no reason he shouldn't. At the end of the day, he's proved that he can. Hopefully he gets healthy, can stay consistent, and show that he can be that NFL guy.
And as we move from Garrett Shrader here, as you talked about the fact that you believe, that arm is there. Do you have anything for him to improve on? Do you have anything that you've seen on film that you think he could get better at? You said, his timing was the biggest thing that was positively shown to you by what you've seen, and you talked about him trusting his receivers and whatnot. Is there anything that you feel like is an area of necessity for him to work on?
I think there's, as a quarterback, there's always things that you can improve upon. I think the biggest thing is being able to make the plays as consistently as possible throughout the game. I genuinely believe that he's a guy who has shown it, but it hasn't necessarily been all 4 quarters.
Yeah,
I definitely think he has that capability, and at the end of the day, he's shown that he can play in the ACC, and he's just got to be able to do it 4 quarters and 13 or so games.
Yeah, and that's really what it comes down to, is making sure that he stays healthy and does what he needs to do. But he's definitely shown that he's been a bright spot for Syracuse in recent history. Carlos Rio-Wilson, a guy that came into Syracuse, transferred into Syracuse. Your take on Carlos? We saw him a little bit last season. This season in the spring game was not what I had hoped to see from Carlos Rio-Wilson. What is your take on him and your thoughts on him? As we've seen him sparingly, but he's one of the quarterbacks that decided to stay. they had Lenoris Sellers, and Lenoris decommitted and decided to stay home in the state of South Carolina and go to the Gamecocks. They lost Justin Lamson, who I've been saying for the last couple of years, if that kid doesn't play, he's a California guy. He's going to end up going home. And why stay, on a totally separate coast from where he grew up? And sure enough, he left, and he's over at Stanford now. And so, you see these guys leave and not be there in the stable. I'm sad about Justin Lamson because I thought that he could be a good part of the future for, this Syracuse offense. But as we look to have Mahoney back on here, and hopefully we can grab him back on here in a second. So, Carlos Del Rio-Wilson is somebody that we're looking at right now and seeing what can happen with Carlos Del Rio-Wilson. Hopefully, he could put himself in a position to be a good backup for Garrett Shrader, because Shrader is definitely going to need him, and Syracuse is going to need him. You always need that backup. You always need to know that you have somewhat of a safety net. There's a reason why a player is going to be a backup, right? So there's the reality that you don't expect them to come in there and be just like a starter, but you do expect the fact that we can see these quarterbacks step in and for hopefully to not be too much drop off. So as we have, Zach back here with us, as we break down these quarterbacks, when you look at Carlos Del Rio-Wilson, what is it that you see from him in the time that we have gotten to see, which hasn't been much? What's your takeaway, Zach?
I think the biggest thing is it is with any quarterback is consistency. You look at the numbers from last year; they don't look great. This is another kid who came from the SEC, and hasn't really played much. It's tough to really put your thumb on what exactly it is when the guy gets sprinkled into a game, or he comes in and might not know the offense as well as someone else. But at the end of the day, if you're going to be a guy who's on the roster at any school throughout the country, if you're a 1 or 2 guy, you have to treat every single week like you're going to be the starter, because you just never know what's going to happen. We see it time and time again. A starter goes out, and the first thought that most people have is, that team's done. And if you're going to be a backup, especially in the ACC, you got to really hone in on your craft and take reps seriously, and you got to be able to make sure you're improving every single day.
Yeah, and that's the thing that I was talking about is, obviously a backup is a backup for a reason in most cases, unless a coach is just, personally not fond of somebody and maybe doesn't let them play for their own whatever reasons. Outside of that, 9 times out of 10, you're saying, okay, this person's a backup because they're not as good as the starter. But you hope that there's not going to be as much drop-off. And I think the thing that's kind of a little bit concerning for me was going to the spring game. And I understand it's the spring game, but it's like, you're not playing up against an opponent that's going to come up there and smack you. You could play more loose. You could play more free. And yet it seemed like Carlos Del Rio-Wilson was struggling with his timing. He was struggling with, where the ball was being placed and the ball kind of sailing out of his hands. So my hope is that as we move forward, he improves here and gets a little bit more comfortable, because it was not what I anticipated when I watched him in the spring game. So hopefully things will get better. Everybody has their day, and sometimes things don't look as pretty, but what would be your advice to him? I mean, we talked about your advice to Garrett, the starter. What's your advice to Carlos Del Rio-Wilson? Because there is always that chance that, hey, you know what? Your number gets called, you got to play, and he's got to be ready.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for a backup is truly just getting the mental reps. Obviously, you're not going to get as many physical reps in practice or throughout the week, so you really have to hone in and take advantage of those physical reps when you get them. But at the end of the day, you need to be able to have a true understanding of the offense and the defenses that you're looking at. Because if you're someone who can go in and when a play's called, you have an idea of where the ball's already going to go, and then you can just react to what may change. I think having the understanding of your playbook and defense is supremely important. You hear about guys all the time, like Cam Newton, who in college just threw to people he saw. Yeah. He didn't have an understanding of defenses, but he was so dynamic it didn't matter in college. It caught up to him a bit in the NFL, and you can see that throughout the career. But being able to truly have, just the will to want to work on it when you're not on the field is secondary to none if you want to be able to succeed on the field.
Absolutely. And hopefully we could see some good things and some rays of hope from Carlos Del Rio-Wilson, because like I said, Syracuse has lost in that stable. I mean, Luke McPhail is still there, but, Syracuse has lost a lot of quarterbacks just not wanting to sit, not wanting to wait. And I mean, we live in a society now where it's about right now. It's about give it to me now. I want it instantaneously. And that's the unfortunate part of all of this is, guys aren't willing to wait. They're not willing to work. And not being willing to wait and being willing to work is something that's a really difficult thing to take in here. So as we look at it, we look at the quarterbacks that are on the roster currently, and we will be discussing we will be discussing another Syracuse quarterback here in a second. But looking at who's on the roster right now for the Syracuse Orange at quarterback, we mentioned Garrett Shrader, Lamson not, Carlos Del Rio-Wilson is there, and Luke McPhail, and then bringing in Braden Davis. So Braden Davis hopefully being a ray of hope because of the fact that, Syracuse really doesn't have that quarterback stable. So South Carolina transfer quarterback Braden Davis is coming in, and Braden Davis, there's a hope that he's going to be able to get some things done here. Kind of ironic that they get a South Carolina transfer quarterback in Braden Davis when they lost the quarterback of their future, Lenora Sellers, to South Carolina. So the irony of getting one and losing one when it comes to the state of South Carolina. Here with Zack Mahoney as we break down the quarterbacks of Syracuse's roster going into this season, which they don't have many. And Jacoby and Morgan, all these guys, you look at the guys that have gone that could have been the backup, and now they're no longer with the team. So Braden Davis becomes an even bigger necessity here for the squad coming from South Carolina. What do you know about Braden Davis, Zach?
Not too much. I watched a little bit of his film earlier. Know that he was playing high school ball in Delaware. So, not trying to ruin Delaware high school football, but I don't think the competition is as good as some of these other states. But going, winning a state champion and being able to really separate yourself in high school, I think he showed it. I think when you look at his film, he just looks like a natural. The way the ball comes off his hand is super smooth. His feet aren't, going all over the place. I think the biggest thing for a guy like this is getting him reps. I think he's a big guy. I think he's got the ability to, throw the ball in this conference, and he's just got to be able to get out there and prove it. As you mentioned, the quarterback situation's light, so there's obviously an opportunity to start moving yourself up. And, when Garrett's done playing, that's going to be free competition for that starting spot. And I think when you start talking about the future of the quarterbacks, it starts today. It starts this off season, and who's going to be able to separate themselves. And I think he's got a really good chance to, do that.
Yeah, and I hope so. And we got a message that came in here about Carlos Del Rio-Wilson, which I agree with. That said, in his time on the field last year certainly showed that the game seemed to be moving way too fast for him. Poor reads and decisions deferred to his legs to move the ball forward. Hopefully he'll take a giant leap forward this season. And I saw, and that's the thing that was kind of frustrating and tough, is that I saw that in spring ball. So it kind of looked like Carlos was similar to where he was last year, and you want to see that improvement, and you don't want to, but it does. It's a good way to put it. It looked like the game was kind of, on the freeway, and he was maybe in a school zone, so you see that difference of him going 20 miles an hour in his head and the game going 80. And so hopefully Carlos can improve there. But yeah, having Braden Davis, listen, this guy could become the second string guy. There's a reason why you bring him in. and there's a reason why you work him. So there's an opportunity for him to take something here, and he comes into a great situation because, like I said, no Justin Lamson, no Jacoby and Morgan, a bunch of these guys, no Lenoris Sellers, they left. They either left or they didn't come because they have made a decision that somewhere else was better. So now you have this wide open opportunity to take some reins here and to get the job. I think Braden Davis, if anybody, you're the same way. You talk about being fifth string. You didn't come to Syracuse to play fifth string. You came to Syracuse to be a starter, to know that you could be a starter, to work to be a starter. And if you're working to, what do they say? If you fight for your limitations, you get to keep them. So I think the reality is if you fight to be the backup, well, there's a good chance you're going to be one. And if you're fighting to be a backup, the second string, you might become the third string. So I think you got to fight to start. You got to fight to put yourself out there. And, looking at Braden Davis, my hopes for him is that he can, do something here to hopefully give some positives to Syracuse in the background if and when they were to need him. Because unfortunately, I don't think that Syracuse has a great backup situation currently right now. So I would like to see Braden step it up here and showcase what he can do. And hopefully some things will come out here and we'll be able to see some successes for Braden Davis and, see what can happen and the value of maybe what South Carolina originally saw in him. So with that being, with any other notes you want to make on Braden?
And not necessarily Braden, but just quarterbacks in general. If you're not the number one guy, it obviously hurts. You want to be the starter. You want to be the person to help your team. But if you're not him, what are you doing to put yourself in a position to potentially be there? Because, obviously people are transferring left and right because they want to go start. But what have you done to show that you can be a starter? I think you got to be able to prove it. And in the past, it's shown Garrett's health hasn't always been there. And there's an opportunity to potentially step in this year if anything were to happen. But I think the biggest thing is truly you got to be able to know the playbook like the back of your hand and truly take a look at the film that you're watching and get so used to the defenses that once you step out on the field, the mental side of it isn't there. And you've already practiced everything. You've had hundreds and thousands of reps that you're just ready to go. And it doesn't matter who's across from you, but you're ready to compete. Because at the end of the day, competition creates the best product. And whether that's from 3-2 or 2-1, if you're not pushing yourself, you're not pushing everyone else around you, your team's going to suffer from that.
And Zach, for you, in your story from fifth string walk on to starter, playing up against Clemson and LSU and giving them a lot, a lot more than fans expected from the starting quarterback, and what you did to keep the team in the game and the team in general, how they got around you when you were there for numerous games and definitely circling Clemson and LSU. What can you say about kind of how you handled it, how you went about the game? Because you were ready. And I could tell you, second string, third string guys don't look as ready as you in every situation. Fifth string, walk on, pushing LSU and Clemson to the brink. There's a lot to be said about that and your work. And you didn't give up. There was some people that maybe thought, hey, this game is over. And you're there working on the field. And maybe they're walking out of the dome going, oh, I just heard something. Oh, I heard that in the bathroom. Oh, that was a cheer. I think I should go back to my seat. What was it about you? Because you have an incredible story in what you did at Syracuse. And even though it may not show up in the win-loss column, there's not a lot of expectation when you have to dig so far into your depth because of injury and different things that have happened. Why were you prepared? Why were you ready? And bring us into your story from your eyes.
I think it goes back to high school. Truly, I had a quarterback coach in high school, John Bucher, who now is the head coach at Lyons Township. He was a Big Ten player. He played professionally a bit. But when I was a junior in high school, we would come in on weekends and we wouldn't even discuss offense, but we would just talk about defenses. What's cover 2, what's cover 3, what's cover 4, and what are the different nuances that go along with that. Being able to understand defenses from an earlier age helped me tremendously in high school. I didn't start playing until playoffs my junior year, and then started one season in high school and was able to then go to the junior college. But the first day of practice at Syracuse, I walked in, met everyone there. The first thing that they were talking about was defenses. And a lot of the guys were kind of shocked to hear certain verbiage or have an understanding of it. And so I think, and I thank John all the time, he really got me ready mentally to have an understanding of what to see. And then at that point, when you start to be around the guys and you're able to see, get used to the feel, because even just watching, there's a huge difference playing at Syracuse compared to junior college or high school, obviously. But being able to get the feel, kind of slowly work my way in with some reps, I truly believe taking the playbook seriously, because there's a lot of times that, Coach Babers and Coach Lewis, and even back with the old guy, with Lester and Shafe, it was always, when you first come into college, you're at a high school level. Year one, you typically become a graduate or you become a college degree. How can you get to a master's and how can you get to a doctor's level when it comes to all of the football terms, defenses, everything else? Because when you take a look at this year's quarterbacks who got drafted, that was the biggest thing about Bryce Young. He didn't have the strongest arm. He didn't have the size that everyone would normally think, but he would beat you with his mind. He'd beat you with his ability to prepare for games, and it showed week in and week out. And I think that's why you're starting to see the stereotypes of these big, strong guys with the big arms. They might not have the mental side of the game, and ultimately that's going to affect them. I think that's why Will Levis dropped. I think that's why there's a lot of questions on some of the guys coming out who don't produce. And at the end of the day, being able to understand your own playbook and then understand the defense's playbook, that's what's really going to separate you.
Yeah, no, like you said, the mental side of the game, I mean, nothing can substitute that. You can prepare as much as you want, know as much film, be strong, have, that God-given height and all that great stuff. But if you are not prepared mentally, or you can be invaded mentally, you're not going to succeed.
Yep, absolutely.
It's all about mental toughness in any walk of life. We're going to take a step aside here on Wake Up Call with Dan Tortora. Inside of MonPawsPopcorn.com's What's Poppin'. Myself and Zack Mahoney will be back right after this. We're analyzing quarterbacks this morning for you all around the world. We appreciate you being here on all of our wonderful outlets, youtube.com and facebook.com, both /wakeupcalldt, as well as on wakeupcalldt.podbean.com. We've given you our Syracuse quarterbacks. We'll be bringing you the rookie quarterbacks of the NFL. We'll be speaking on Bryce Young, as well as C.J. Stroud, Anthony Richardson, Will Levis, and Hendon Hooker after this fast break on Wake Up Call with Dan Tortora.
Carvel DeWitt, it's what happy tastes like. Do you know why? Because we make ice cream. Creamy, rich, flavorful ice cream. Not yogurt or iced milk like some of our competitors. Ice cream. Fresh, by hand, daily. For the calorie conscious, we have something new for you. Our new Carvelite. Same great flavor, creaminess, and texture of our regular ice cream with only 35 calories an ounce. So whether you want an ice cream cake, flying saucer, dasher, carvalanche, hard or soft ice cream, we will satisfy your craving with our fresh, handmade regular or new Carvelite ice cream. Carvel DeWitt. It's what happy tastes like.
This is Jimmer Sikowski, owner-operator of Chick-fil-A Cicero, 7916 Brewerton Road in Cicero, right in front of the Home Depot. I had a deep feeling that God wanted me to do something bigger with my life and to help people, help others. I kept putting Chick-fil-A in my life, and I realized as I was going through the franchise selection process that positively impacting the lives of others was really core to what we do here at Chick-fil-A. First of all, it starts with the food. The food is brought in fresh daily. We bring in local produce. We prepare to order in the kitchen. We hand bread our chicken. We hand spin our milkshakes. It's great food. It doesn't taste like fast food. I think the second thing is the way people feel when they come in a Chick-fil-A restaurant. It's different. We try to treat people with intentional kindness here, which is very different and deeper than good customer service. And so I think it feels remarkable for most people to come in a Chick-fil-A restaurant. And then lastly, the impact that we try to have in the community is very different. It's a big part of the expectation of every operator of a Chick-fil-A restaurant with.
The Wildcat Sports Pub in Camillus, New York is located on 3680 Milton Avenue in the Home Depot Plaza. It is your family-friendly sports bar and restaurant. Folks, some sports bars aren't family-friendly. Some family-friendly restaurants are not sports bars. The Wildcat Sports Pub in Camillus, New York is proud to be both. It is that marriage that you've been looking for years. The Wildcat Sports Pub is your home base for your sports bar and restaurant needs, games for the kids, indoor and outdoor activities, and enough things on the menu to come back every single week and get to try something new. They're open Sundays from noon to 8 p.m., Monday through Wednesday, 11 a.m. to 11 p.m., and Thursday through Saturday from 11 a.m. to midnight. For reservations and party information, call 315-487-2222 for the Wildcat family-friendly sports pub and restaurant. Welcome back here to Wake Up Call with Dan Tortora. Happy to be here with you where sports truly meets that thing called life. We're here on a beautiful morning here in central and upstate New York, and happy to get to you around the world. And we're here picture in picture with Zack Mahoney, Syracuse Orange quarterback alum, breaking down the quarterbacks and analyzing what Syracuse has for the 2023 season. You heard about Garrett Shrader as well as Carlos Del Rio-Wilson, and most recently about the transfer from South Carolina, Braden Davis. Now it's time to jump to the NFL. Zach, your thoughts on the number one overall pick and first quarterback taken in this year's draft, Bryce Young, heading to the Carolina Panthers.
I think it's a very interesting dynamic what we're seeing in today's football. You're looking at a guy who didn't wow anybody when he walks into a room, but the moment he steps onto a field, he's an absolute killer. You can say whatever you want about the teams he's been on or the coaches and the defense that he's played with, but at the end of the day, this dude he would tear up every defense. It didn't matter who you were, and I think the toughness that he showed goes an incredibly long way. I know a lot of people want to talk about his size, but he's going to be more protected in the NFL than he was in college, and I think he's obviously going to have I think he'll have a great career as long as you got the right pieces around him. So DJ Moore obviously got traded to my Bears, so I love that, but he's not going to have the weapons that he's used to having. There's a new coaching staff there. There's a lot of new things going on in Charlotte, and I think it's going to be interesting to see how that ultimately plays out. But I think when you talk about being a quarterback from top to bottom, he's shown that he's it.
What is it about his game that you think is the biggest positive as he gets set to lead the Carolina Panthers?
I think for him, it's his timing, his accuracy, and his brain. He does it, in his entire career, he threw 12 interceptions, but he also had, 80 touchdowns.
Yeah.
Having a 6-to-1 ratio in the SEC is incredible. So for him to be able to beat these defenses that he's playing week in, week out, he's shown that he can compete with the best. And, you heard all the hype about there's not many people that take the game seriously or are as focused as him off the field. And I think that's what separated him dramatically in this draft class.
Arm strength wise and his delivery to, his ability to deliver a ball quickly, rapidly through the air. What are your thoughts on that? The arm strength of Bryce Young as well as the speed of his ball once he has that release?
I think he's got a quick release, which I think his quick release and his timing makes up for a lot of the lack of arm strength. He obviously has an NFL arm, but when you're talking about some of the elite guys that are in this league, he's clearly a step below. But today, it's not about how far you can throw it. It's about where you can throw it and under the pressure. And again, he's shown it week in and week out against tremendous competition, and that's why he went number one.
The fact that his ball, kind of going off of that, the fact that it seems to kind of sail a little bit longer through the air, what's that going to do for him in the NFL? I mean, can he tweak that? Can he change that? Can a quarterback's coach help him to, like you said, you talked about a quick release, helps the fact of the arm strength. But with this ball taking taking a little bit longer, a half of a second is, is important in the NFL. So, can the ball that he throws that kind of seems to sail through the air longer than some quarterbacks are in the NFL right now, what can be adjusted about that, and what are your thoughts on that, knowing that the game's going to speed up?
I'm not saying he's got a weak arm. I mean, you don't pick someone in first overall if they can't make all the throws. That's as simple as that. He can make them. It just might take a little bit longer. But I think when you take a look at guys like Jalen Hurts, when he was coming out, the biggest knock on him was, same thing, not the greatest arm strength. The ball sail a little bit. His deep balls, I think he's super accurate with the deep ball, but it takes a while to get down there. And I think seeing guys like Russell Wilson throw a deep ball, now you can see that it can correlate. The biggest thing for him is he's going to be able to work on it. I mean, he's still a young guy. He's going to be able to build up that strength, and ultimately everything else, all his other intangibles are going to make up for his, the not elite level arm strength.
They say the argument a lot with Alabama quarterbacks is what they have, right? Some of these elite teams, Ohio State, when you look at all the talent that they have on their team, they'll say, is the quarterback good, or did the receivers make him look good? Did the offensive line make him look good? What is your response to that when we're looking specifically at Bryce Young and people say, well, he had great receivers. He had 5-star offensive linemen. What's your response to that?
I mean, he was still playing in ultimately the best conference in college football. And there was never a game that he truly looked like he wasn't the best player on the field. He had a couple hiccups throughout the career, but that's going to happen to everyone. The biggest thing for him is that he's already proved it. At this point now, you just got to go show it again, and I think he will.
Yeah, and the thing is, I mean, when you're playing at Alabama, you're getting everybody's best game all the time. So that's another good thing too. And they always say, the SEC is like the NFL light. It's like right underneath the NFL and close to it. Same flavor but less calories, so to speak. That type of thing. So living in that world, but watching Bryce here in the studio, I think the thing is, and yeah, he's under 6 foot, so people are going to freak out about that. And because no matter anything that Doug Flutie did, one of the first things on everybody's mind is, yeah, he did it for a little guy. And then, you hear the same thing about Kyler Murray. So, and Jalen Hurts, that was a concern too. The ability to move on his feet. Bryce Young, you talked about his decision making and just being, a student of the game and being really smart and beating people with his mind. What can you say about when that mind links to his feet and the decisions he's made to take off and run, but not even that, his ability to be elusive in the pocket, move himself around, and still stay poised while there's pressure coming?
I think the scariest thing about Bryce is he's dynamic, but and obviously if a good quarterback's out of the pocket, it's going to scare defenses. But even when he's in the pocket and he's getting suffocated there, he always seems to be able to make a play. So for a guy of this size to have the escapability and the playmaking ability within the pocket and a lot of people in his face, I think that's such a huge benefit to him, because he's obviously going to be getting rushed a lot. I mean, the Carolina Panthers were not a great team last year. I hope they're not a good team this year, so the Bears can get another high-round pick from them. But I think it's so tough you can try to knock people as much as you can, but at the end of the day, the proof is in the pudding. And this guy, when it mattered most, was able to just dominate people from the pocket.
That coming about Bryce Young here on Wake Up Call with Dan Tortora, as Zack Mahoney joins me to analyze these rookie quarterbacks after speaking on the Syracuse quarterbacks coming in this season, with Zack being an alum of Syracuse University's football team. So Bryce Young heading to the Panthers. After Bryce Young, we saw the drafting of C.J. Stroud. And so my top 4 picks of the draft, my prognostication was all correct. I had Bryce Young, C.J. Stroud, and Will Richardson. What did I have? Will Richardson and Anthony. Oh, pardon me. So I had Will, and then I had Anthony Richardson from there. So because there were some people that thought that the NFL draft was going to go, that C.J. Stroud maybe would be drafted a little bit lower. Maybe we were going to see Anthony Richardson come up the board here. And so that was what some people had kind of prognosticated was going to happen. I had Bryce Young, C.J. Stroud, Will Anderson, pardon me, I said Will Richardson. Will Anderson Jr., linebacker out of Alabama, and then Anthony Richardson coming from there. A lot of my first round I felt good about, Zach, because I do it every year. I do my mock draft, and these last couple of years, I should say, and there was one player that I was like, who? And then beyond that, things were either, and even if it wasn't the exact player, it was either one pick off or it was the same position that was drafted. So I was understanding, okay, the Jets, I think they're going to take this guy. Oh, they didn't take that guy. Well, they still took a D end or whatever it may be. So The first 4 picks here I had correct. The second one was C.J. Stroud out of Ohio State. Your thoughts on C.J. Stroud and what he can do? You know, I will say this. I looked up his numbers after the fact, and I went, I didn't realize that he was doing like that well. His numbers are pretty special, and now he's a Houston Texan. They know what it's like to draft an early quarterback in Deshaun Watson, and now they're looking for their future franchise guy. What do you think about C.J. Stroud?
I think that's a great comparison to have, and I think the Houston Texans should be very happy with the 2 young guys that they're bringing in. C.J. Stroud, as far as throwing the ball, seemed to be as good of a thrower in this draft class as anybody else. Again, I think he's a slight step below these elite arm level guys, but I think he's got a better arm than Bryce. I think similar to what you're saying, when you look at his stats, how are you not drafting this guy second when he's put up over 8,000 yards, over 80 touchdowns, and only 6 interceptions his last season? I don't, and I know we've spoken about it before, but the hype and, you know, the potential for some people, this guy over the last 2 years was truly one of the top 1 or 2 quarterbacks to play. Why are you not going to take him 1 or 2? He proved at a big time school that he can compete with the best in the conference and the country. And I think I think Houston, again, is similar to the Panthers. I think they're going to be going through some rebuilding, but I think he's the right piece for that team.
What is the best asset that you think C.J. Stroud, when you watch him on film, what is the thing that you think he has in his wheelhouse that's the best piece of him right now?
He's a guy I look at, and I think from timing, arm strength, all these things, he has a lot of great attributes. I don't think anything is elite, but he's been so consistent. And again, at the end of the day, people want consistency, and he's shown whether it's the footwork, throwing a super catchable ball, or being able to put his team in the best positions to win games, he's been able to do that. And everyone wants to kind of go back to that last Georgia game where he went on an absolute tear, and they were saying that was the best quarterback game of people for a quarterback last season. Well, that's a great one to have. Can you now carry that into the NFL and keep that momentum going?
Yeah, you know, and I mean, when we talk about Bryce Young and we spoke about how his ball seems to take, a little bit longer than you want through the air, CJ, he has moments where that ball will come out and you can see that it's getting there quicker than Bryce's, but it still seems kind of slow moving through the air at times. What can you say about his arm strength as well as the timing of his ball when he sends it? Because it looks better, but it still at times looks like it's a little bit of a slow moving ball.
Yeah, I don't think he had necessarily the consistency of a lot of the big time throws that some of the other that Bryce would have, but he would, whether it be 33% or 1 out of 4, he'd be able to make it. And it's just, again, you got to be able to work on this, because when you get to the NFL, routes start to get a little bit deeper, the windows get a little bit tighter. He's proved that he can do it. And now it's just got to be as consistent as the best guys in the league. And he's shown that he was one of the best throwers of the ball, and he's got the arm strength again to make every throw. But I think he's got to clean up his timing a little bit. He's definitely not going to have the kind of talent he had at Ohio State. I've been seeing mock drafts for next year, and 2 of his receivers are going to be top 10 picks, which is crazy to think about that. And he had a first rounder this year. So you're throwing to 3 first-round guys in college.
Yeah.
How is that going to be able to translate to some of the guys you're going to be playing with in Houston?
Well, and that's the thing that I was talking about with Alabama when people say, like, look at the receivers that you have. Ohio State, I mean, you look at you look in history, but even in the last couple of years, it's like you look at the receivers taken off the board, Ohio State, back-to-back guys. You look at Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson, and I said Chris Olave was going to become a starter in New Orleans. I said there's nobody to take that job. He's going to get it. And Garrett Wilson, I said the same thing. He's going to be the starter on the Jets. So, you look at these guys that are coming out. By the way, it pains me every single time I have to see Marvin Harrison's name and he's not in a Syracuse Orange and Blue. That's very just sad for me, Marvin Harrison Jr., but I'm really happy for him. Just sad for Syracuse in that respect. But that's the, what you just brought up, the fact that he's in Houston now and his receivers are Robert Woods, who, he caught on a little bit with the Rams, but he was underwhelming with the Buffalo Bills. He was underwhelming with the Titans and in most of his career. Nico Collins, not a household name. They drafted John Mechie III. He's coming off an injury. Nathaniel Dell was brought in from Houston, who I covered. Amari Rodgers, who's, kind of stuck around the NFL and he's, coming out of Clemson. There's really no household name on this team. So he's going from Ohio State, where season to season or every couple seasons, you got 2 or 3 guys could be drafted in the first round, if not the early part of the second round at wide receiver. And now, you have this stable. What do you think that CJ Stroud has enough talent to overcome the fact that he's going to a Houston team that very well could be drafting in the top 10 next year too, and go and get one of his wide receivers?
I think it's going to be tough to say that he's going to succeed right away with all the other pieces around him. I think the Houston Texans are such a young team, but I think there's an energy about DeMeco Ryans and what he's doing there and who he's bringing in. I mean, that team you mentioned, there's no star players, but there's a lot of speed. There's a lot of quickness out there that he's going to be able to throw the ball to. And even if, he might not be taking the same deep shots that he was all the time in college and letting his guys just go up and win. But I think you're going to be able to put him in a position where it's a lot of quick and short or intermediate throws, put your receivers in positions to make him look good. And I think that's what the Texans need to do in order for him to succeed early. But they're also, I think the good news is the AFC South has been a bit of a struggle as a whole conference in the last couple of years. So there's an opportunity that, if things get clicking early, they could make some noise.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. I mean, my Jaguars are in there, and my hope is that Jacksonville, creates some positive consistency here and can take this division again. And I think they can, but I would like to see them actually do it. CJ Stroud, though, I mean, they have Davis Mills. They drafted him a couple of years ago, 3rd-round guy out of Stanford, serviceable guy, right? You got Case Keenum there. I don't necessarily know if you have to put Stroud out there right away. And I know you talked about his timing and some other thing, and the fact that, he's going from NFL caliber receivers, high quality, multiple guys that could be a number 1 guy, to a team that doesn't have a number 1 guy in the NFL. So where are we with CJ Stroud? Would you like to see him sit for the first few weeks? I mean, how do you look at it? Because I'm looking at the depth chart right now that has him in the starting situation, and he's at OTAs and whatnot. So where do we see this? I mean, I know my opinion on it, but what is yours?
You hear some people are force-sitting guys, some people are, you just got to get reps. I think with how young the team is, it doesn't necessarily make sense to sit them. I think now is a great time to be getting as many reps as possible. And at the end of the day, if he's a better quarterback than Davis Mills, who showed that he could play a little bit last year, again, he wasn't a consistent guy. He was able to, win some games and look okay, but there were some other games he looked lost out there.
Yeah.
So I think if CJ Stroud can come out of camp, come out of OTAs, and really prove that he's, the guy, I don't think there's a reason to sit him.
Yeah, and I think I can understand that because, like you said, it's a young team, this and that. I mean, I guess with the Texans, they've been on the bottom, right? And a lot of times, even with Deshaun Watson, they weren't winning the division because they were great. They were winning the division because, let's face it, the AFC South didn't really threaten anybody. The Titans weren't threatening anybody for a while. The Jaguars weren't threatening anybody. And the Colts, since losing Andrew Luck, have just had a constant just recycling. Let's bring in this guy who's toward the tail end of his career. Let's bring in this guy for a year. Let's bring in this guy for a couple of years. Let's bring in this backup quarterback, see if he could start. So, I think with Houston, you don't want to see... Well, the thing that people need to understand is a rookie quarterback is going to make mistakes. Being so close to Jacksonville and covering Trevor Lawrence in college as well at Clemson, the question I got all the time was, do you think he's going to be okay? Do you think he's going to be all right? Do you think in year 2 he's going to improve? I said, he's Trevor Lawrence. Yes. People forget that Peyton Manning threw a plethora of... he had so many interceptions. Take your pick of in the interceptions that he threw. But the team won like one game. He threw a ton of interceptions. I'm not saying Trevor Lawrence is Peyton Manning. I'm not making that comparison yet. But what I'm saying is when quarterbacks come in, even the best of them are going to struggle. And let's face it, Jacksonville didn't have a head coach. They had Urban Meyer. They had a guy who's a glorified giant baby. And, he wasn't truly there. He was thinking about other things. Has some girl that's his daughter's age grinding on him in a club instead of traveling back with his team. There's a lot to be said about who he is and who Doug Peterson is, where Doug Peterson brings in his own chaplain and the team talks to me about faith all the time now. So, which is a beautiful thing, by the way. I feel very spoiled. But, yeah, I think Trevor Lawrence went through an adjustment, and I think not having a coach and not having direction and just not having true leadership, that affects it. And I think Blake Bortles, who got a lot of flack when he was in Jacksonville, that man went through a lot of changes, and he had to deal with a lot of things. And, Nate Hackett was the one consistent for him, and Blake Bortles... On all the numbers before Trevor Lawrence came to Jacksonville, Blake Bortles was behind Mark Brunell in a ton of categories. And in all honesty, Mark Brunell had high-level all-pro talent. Blake did not. So I think Blake doesn't get the credit that he deserves, and that's a story for another day. But, with C.J. Stroud, I think, getting back to my point, I think people need to understand mistakes are going to be made. But Houston's been so bad that will they even... see the mistakes? Are they even as glaring? Yeah. If he comes in and he throws 3 interceptions in a game, or he has a tough couple weeks, or the team ends with a record of 5 or 6 wins, are people really going to take it as a bad thing, or are they just going to take it hey, this is status quo, but at least we have a guy for our future? So I think CJ Stroud is in a good position because he can make mistakes, and at the same time, I think maybe he can play more free being on a franchise that's just looking for some type of positive direction.
Yeah, I agree so much with what you're saying there, because you're looking at a division where if Ryan Tannehill gets overtaken by Will Levis, whether it be the spring or sometime during the season, the oldest quarterback in that conference is going to be Trevor Lawrence in his 3rd year.
Yeah.
So you're talking about a lot of young teams that have a lot to prove, and you got a guy like C.J. Stroud. I agree with you that he's going to be able to make a lot of mistakes and be okay with it. But it's going to be able to, all right, if you make one mistake, don't make it 2, come back. If you throw an interception, go score a touchdown the next drive. Yeah. If it's something that is just consistently, can't move the ball, bad turnovers, bad reads, that's something you got to look at. But he's also young. I think he's going to have a pretty big leash to work with. And I think the Texans are probably not going to be anywhere close to competing this year, but I think the chemistry that they're going to get as a young roster, it could potentially flourish in a couple of years.
Yeah, and we stay in the same division. We jump to Anthony Richardson. A lot of hype on this guy. Now, his numbers were not great. They're not going to wow you in college of what he did. Anthony Richardson, going back and looking at him, I remember because Papa Joe, who's going to be coming up here in just a little bit, he's a huge Gator. He's been a Gator fan. That's his team. That's his school. And him and I talking about Anthony Richardson over the last couple of years, he wanted him to be something, but there wasn't a wow factor with Anthony Richardson like you would hope. However, here, this is the story of a guy who he gets out there and he gets some, NFL teams looking at him, and they start to see his arm strength, the different things he could do, and they work him out, and they saw something that they liked. Anthony Richardson, by the numbers, didn't have, big numbers here. And like I said, underwhelming at Florida. However, there's the hope of what he can do as he steps forward. I mean, I look at in 2020, he only played in 3 games and only attempted 2 passes. But in 2021, he had 529 yards, 6 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. He was only a true starter last season. 17 games, 176 completions on 327 attempts, 53.8% completion percentage, 2,549 yards, 17 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. So this guy is the true example of somebody buying into a player based on sheer talent, raw talent, and his potential. Now, when you're drafting on potential, the 4th overall pick, you're taking a big roll of the dice. What do you think about Anthony Richardson?
I hope he does well. Outside of the Bears, I root for all my old teammates. So obviously my captain Ziggy's playing over there. I want them to have an extremely successful season. Want him to have a great year. And Anthony Richardson was by far the most dynamic quarterback in this draft class. I think with where the NFL is today, if you're not going to be able to beat someone on 3 downs with your arm, you got to be able to do it with your legs. And I think that was the thing that separated him compared to anyone else in this draft class. That being said, you're right. Taking someone 4th overall with a group that has struggled finding the right quarterback, they've been going after the older guys and trying to put them in there. They're finally going to be able to let someone grow. So I think he's, again, going to have a pretty big leash like CJ and Bryce, but he's also going to be around guys that can play. So he might have a pretty big leash, but he's also got to come in and make some stuff happen.
Yeah.
Now he's going to have a pretty decent line in front of him. He's going to have an all-pro running back, and he's got some weapons. So he's coming into an extremely good fit. So now it's being able to take that potential and actually put it on the field. And as always, it's always about consistency. You do it week 1, can you do it in week 11 and, potentially in the playoffs?
There's some crazy throws that he's made. And I think that's where, the excitement comes in. There was one play that he made where he jumped up in the air, faked it. And normally when you see that, like Ben Roethlisberger pump fake that, and then he goes, I mean, this man jumped in the air, faked it, turned around, rolled out, and threw the ball. So I think when it comes to like athleticism and it comes to that unique kind of personality, and I can't help but say this, and I'm not here to, I don't ever like saying like this guy's like this, I mean, comparisons for the sake of people understanding, but he gives me that like Jordan kind of perspective, right? In the sense of like, he just has a unique skill set. He has a unique way about him. There's a different flavor to him is what I would say. So, the way that he gets the ball out, what he does, how he's able to move. And the thing is, I mean, he could throw that ball deep downfield and it's a pretty ball and people like that. I like, of all the quarterbacks we talked about in the NFL right now, watching his highlights as I'm sitting here in the studio and looking back on his time at Florida, I think that his ball looks probably the cleanest of the 3 that we've talked about so far.
Yeah, I think he definitely has the biggest arm out of the first 3 we talked about, but he's also been the most inconsistent out of those 3.
Right.
I think the biggest thing for him is he's a guy who's 6'4", 250, and it was able to score multiple 80-yard touchdowns with his feet.
Yeah.
You put a guy like him and Jonathan Taylor in the background, well, defenses might start, loading the box a bit more and really make him throw the ball. And if you're Anthony Richardson, you got to be smiling ear to ear that you're going to have the ability to prove all these doubters wrong. That, hey, I'm an athlete, I'm a playmaker, but they drafted me because I'm a quarterback. And at the end of the day, he will have the pieces there. Like we mentioned, he's in the division, so he's going to be able to have 6 games against some competition that might not be pushing as some of the best in the league. But at the same time, he's got a tremendous opportunity. And I think out of all the rookies, he's the one that's got to do stuff right now. Although, again, him being a bit younger might have a leash, but he's got to be able to perform right away.
Yeah, I think the thing with Anthony Richardson is, well, what we've been talking about. He looks like he has the cleanest ball. He looks like, his ball sails through the air the fastest of, the Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, Anthony Richardson conversation, but the inaccuracy, right? So you got the strongest arm of the 3 that we're talking about. You have that ball that's sailing through the air a lot quicker, which is good for the NFL because it's all about timing and making sure that ball can speed downfield because everything's going to be faster. But at the same time, is that ball speeding downfield to wide open grass, or is it speeding downfield to the right person? So, when it comes to accuracy mishaps, how do you correct that? What can you do, as a quarterback, Zach? What can his quarterback coach with the Colts really hone in on and work on with him when it comes down to accuracy and timing? And I mean, he's had good placement, but it's about making sure that he's consistently putting the ball where it needs to go. So what can we do with him in the lab, so to speak?
I think the biggest thing when you talk about accuracy with a quarterback is the foundation, from the ground up. Being able to have the right footwork, being able to have your feet always ready to make a throw. He can make, the off the back foot 40-yard throw and no problem. He's going to be able to make throws that some guys in the NFL just can't.
Yeah.
So with him being able to have that arm talent, he's got to bring everything else with it. And, when you having the stability of a good footwork, that's going to lead to being able to throw it a bit more accurately. But then is something we've already touched on. It's knowing the offense, knowing when you get out of the huddle, you're finding your defenders of who you're going to be looking for. How are you going to be able to make plays? Because he's going to have to be able to make them with his arm. But I think he's got to bring the rest of his body with him if he wants to succeed early.
Yeah, and that, I mean, like you said, he's built for today's NFL and his ability to run the ball. But, this is where Jacksonville, who's tried to bolster up their defense and their team in general, this is where you play them a couple times a year and they got to let you know where they're at. I mean, Jacksonville, you think about it, if Anthony Richardson is to start week 1, then Jacksonville, they're coming to town. So, that this is going to be a test of, what can he do with his feet and how successful can he be in the NFL. We've seen what Lamar Jackson could do. We've seen what other guys, have done in history with, RG3 and whatnot. But the question, and Michael Vick, the question becomes, what does Anthony Richardson want to be? This long ball that he throws, can he be consistent with? I think it's really what it comes down to. He has the strength. He has the ability. He has this freakish athlete style of him where he could do crazy things and still stay up and get the ball out. But it comes down to accuracy, and it comes down to, in a panic mode, is he going to look for that receiver or is he going to take off? What identity is he going to have? And I hope that he can find a balance between the two, because a running quarterback is going to be dangerous, but it's also dangerous to be a running quarterback because of how many times we see guys get hit. RG3's career is never what we thought it could have been because of the hits.
Yep. And I think you mentioned the play earlier where he does the 360 on the people. There's still going to be a lot of plays that I think when he first starts out, he thinks he's going to make, and he won't be able to. Yeah. I don't think he's got the same athleticism as a Lamar Jackson, who's insanely quick and can make you miss. Anthony Richardson might be able to outrun you, but if you're trying to make some of these circus plays outside of the pocket, you just got to make sure that you're smart with it. You hear it all the time from these rookie quarterbacks: throwing the ball away and having an incompletion is better. than potentially trying to force a play. So I think if he can get comfortable with having the understanding that, don't force every play, just be able to put the throws on the guy and let your guys make an opportunity or make a play. Because, like you mentioned, there's going to be teams that are blitzing every single down, and it's going to be up to him to put the ball in a place where his receivers can make it. And I think the Colts have some weapons out there that they're going to be able to do so, and that'll quickly, back off some of these defenses. And now you're talking about an insanely dynamic duo in a backfield that can put you on the ground.
Yeah, they bring in Zach Moss to join Jonathan Taylor. They bring in Syracuse Orange, former running backs coach DeAndre Smith. Michael Pittman Jr. is there. Alec Pierce, who I covered at Cincinnati's, also going to be there trying to make a name for himself in year number 2. So we'll see. But, it's hard to not get excited about Anthony Richardson. You just want that accuracy to be down. And, you want him to be able to, yes, of course, use his feet, use the talent, skill set that you have. But at the same time, can he make those right decisions in crunch time? And can he make those passes that he needs to make when he needs to make those plays? That's really what it comes down to. Is we know he has a lot of great things in his wheelhouse, but what is he going to choose when push comes to shove? And in that mental side of things, is he going to be able to make the right reads and the right decisions? And now we're going to talk about him as a quarterback 3 or 4 years from now. That's really what it comes down to. Are we going to talk about him as a runner? We're going to talk about him as a quarterback. So the next one up here with Zack Mahoney before we finish up, Will Levis, drafted by the Tennessee Titans. This is a unique situation. I'm sad about this situation because I don't really think it's respectful at all to Malik Willis. Now, Malik Willis fell down the draft board in 2022, and I said in that draft Kenny Pickett would be first of any quarterback off. He would be going to the Pittsburgh Steelers. He did. And I love Desmond Ridder, and I covered Desmond Ridder for numerous years and interviewed him at Cincinnati, and I'm happy Atlanta took him. I did not anticipate that Malik Willis was going to fall the way he fell to the 3rd round, but obviously there was something that people didn't like. We saw him sparingly last year. I don't think it was ever his offense or ever his team, yet I feel like there's been a decision made by drafting Will Levis that they're done with Malik Willis. And I'd love to get your thoughts on Levis and what he brings to the game. I'm not moved by Will Levis. Like I said to you before we got on air, I might have been one of the only people in the world that didn't put him in my first round mock draft. I had him falling out of the first round. It was no, personal attack or anything. It was just when I looked at my my teams and I looked at the players available, he just didn't fit for me in the first round. I also didn't like kind of like the staging of hot girls by him. It seemed like they were all almost trying to make him look good, make him look like people want to be around him. It's like he's got one girl there who's beautiful and dark features and dark hair, and then he's got a blonde next to him with blue eyes, and then he's got a couple girls, and I don't know. It brought me back to the movie Draft Day, where that quarterback thought he was going high, and Diddy is his agent, and the guy gets up and freaks out, and he's like, I need you to come back in here. That's how I kind of felt about Will Levis. I think that he could be a bust, but I'd love to get your thoughts.
I think, touching on the draft stuff, I think it's hard to have that kind of criticism when you're talking about family and the close people around him. I think the bigger stuff was more the way he carried himself in the off season. This guy was, boasting about his arm. He was boasting about all the unique and weird things that he likes to do. But at the end of the day, this is football. What have you done on the field that makes you think you're a top 5 guy? Because your stats aren't there. You had the physique and you had the ability to prove it week in, week out. But you look at his senior year stats, he played in 11 games. He had 19 touchdowns, 10 interceptions. You were just talking about guys that had a 6-to-1 TD to interception ratio. He's not even at 2. I think the arrogance that he came into this, this offseason with really bit him in the butt. But at the same point in time, I think he's now in a better position where he's not. I mean, can you really call a second rounder a bust? There's more pressure on right now than the first 3 guys we've talked about than Will Levis. if Will Levis never starts or if he's never the guy that people think he is, well, he slipped to the second round for a reason. He's not going to have the same expectations that a lot of people are there with. I think the biggest thing for his career right now is what's Derrick Henry going to do? Because if he has the ability to come into these games, I think he's a great fit for that scheme where you rely on the running game. You got the ability to make these big-time play-action throws.
Yeah.
So I think the scheme he's in, he has the ability to succeed. But I think he's also been the sloppiest quarterback when it comes to film. I mean, you take a look at some games, he never really wowed you with anything on a day-to-day basis. And then he also just had a lot of throws that you really question. Now, I'm a huge believer in people can fix the physical side more than the mental side. If you can't be there mentally, if you can't read defenses and you can't do this, you're not going to be able to succeed in college or the pros.
Yeah.
So, you know, he had a pretty solid completion percentage, but again, it's bad turnovers. It's the arrogance that made it, I believe, truly made him drop. And at the end of the day, he also might be in the best position out of any of the other quarterbacks that got picked in the first couple of rounds.
Well, and the thing about Malik Willis is I think, you know, and I wrote this in the feed, I think that maybe the Titans are getting cold feet on having to adjust their offense to his skill set. You know, you draft Will Levis, you get a pocket passer, you have Ryan Tannehill right now. So it's like, you know, you have more of the same. But I'm not moved by Will Levis's numbers, and I'm definitely not moved by the staging of attractive women around him. I don't, and like you talked about, you know, him saying, well, I could do this, I could do the arrogance and whatnot. It's when somebody tells you how great they are, they're not that great. You know, the people that are good never have to speak. Other people speak for them. And, you know, and they'll tell you. But, you know, I tell people all the time, I do not go out into the world and say, I'm a great broadcaster. If somebody says, what do you do? I tell them what I do. I tell them the name of my show, when it's on. But you never hear me say, I'm a really great broadcaster. I'm pretty awesome. You know, I mean, that's, you're supposed to just go out and do it. I just, the vibe that I get, I do. I think this guy could be a bust. I think, and it's not that like he doesn't have talent, right? I mean, he's in the SEC. Kentucky's had some good moments, but his numbers, again, are not great. And I just don't like the personality. I don't like what that could be to my locker room. And if I have a rookie coming in feeling himself, you know, I mean, it's like you're going to walk in here to a bunch of guys that have played in the NFL and you're going to be like, oh, I got it like that. And no, I mean, I'm not going to want to play for that guy. So, I mean, Trevor Lawrence, fantastic player, #1 overall pick, barely lost ever in his life coming to Jacksonville. I'm in the locker room with Trevor Lawrence. I don't see Trevor Lawrence going, I'm the best, everybody loves me, but his teammates speak for him. Yeah. Everybody speaks for him. Offense, defense, special team, doesn't matter. They all speak for him. You know, this is what Trevor is, the leader that he is what he brought to the team. And he's just a nice guy. The last thing that I did in Jacksonville, and when they beat the Chargers in the playoffs, I was the last media person, I believe, to walk out. And so I finished up my interviews. I'm coming out, and Trevor's walking in from going to the podium, and he looks right at me, and he smiles, and he goes, sup? You know what I mean? It's just little things like that, where a guy who's feeling himself would be like, well, you need to say hello to me, and they'll just walk right by you. You know, you say hello to them, and they don't even hear you. He's like, what's up? You know, like, how you doing? And you can tell they love having Trevor there. So with Will Levis, I'm getting a vibe that Will might have an ego, and I don't want that in my locker room, #1, and I know what it's like to have it, Jalen Ramsey. I don't want that in my locker room, and he also doesn't have the numbers to back it up. And I feel like he has to kind of have a come to Jesus moment where somebody or something kind of makes him stop and say, not an injury or anything like that, but just like something in practice or something stops him or somebody stops him or a phone call that makes him say, okay, you know what? I got to do this. I got to pay my dues. I got to learn. I got to get this better. I'm not sold on the Will Levis. I'm staying with that. I'll let him prove me wrong because, like I told you before, I don't buy into the hype. I'm just
Yep.
I'm not a fan of the Will Levis project right now. I'm not.
Yeah, I think there's a lot that goes into it. I mean, I think the draft was his kind of wake up call. I mean, right now he got shown up by Anthony Richardson. I think the way he was able to compose himself and just go out on the field and say, "Hey, I want to be a quarterback," whereas Will Levis was a bit more boisterous when it came to the way he went about it. But again, at the end of the day, he's got an incredible skill set. But he's never really been able to really mold it. I think he's going to be probably one of the few out of the first 4 quarterbacks taken. He's going to be the first guy that's probably not going to be a starter week 1. Well, if something happens to Ryan Tannehill, he might not see the field in year 1. And I think you're stepping into a guy where Ryan Tannehill is a great leader. He's been a great professional quarterback in this league. I think Will Levis can learn a tremendous amount from him. And if he's, still wants to have that same attitude, I think it'll be pretty similar to Malik Willis of not being able to kind of stick around as much.
Yeah, I'm not sold on Levis. Syracuse's defense exposed Malik Willis. And so basically what I'm saying is I hope Ryan Tannehill just plays for another 10 years. I guess. So with that being said, the final one I want to make a note of is the guy that had better numbers, Hendon Hooker. And, I'm happy when people brought him up, and I appreciate the people brought him up. But Hendon Hooker, for me, was a first-round type of numbers talent. I think if you're looking for a quarterback and it was later on, you could get a Hendon Hooker. He eventually did get drafted, and I'm happy that he did. He spent 3 seasons at Virginia Tech and 2 at Tennessee. His numbers, his passing yardage, so I didn't really play it all in 2018, but in 2019, we look at he had over 1,000 yards passed. He had 1,555, then 1,339. Then he goes to Tennessee. He's a starting quarterback. He has 2,945, and most recently, 3,135. Here's his touchdown interceptions. You talk about all this with some of the other guys. 80 touchdowns in his college career to 12 interceptions. 31 touchdowns, 3 interceptions in 2021, 27-2 in 2022. His completion percentage, 61.1, 65.3, 68, and 69.6. He's consistently gone up, and he was just shy of 70% on Tennessee in the SEC, getting everybody's best game as a team that almost made the college football playoff. Hendon Hooker, by the numbers, was better than Will Levis, but this is where we hear hype versus actual play. And this is where I will talk about actual play and not so much hype. And this is why when I compared Hendon Hooker and Will Levis, I would have drafted Hendon Hooker without doubt. And I think I had him going to Minnesota so that they could be ready for when Kirk Cousins was done. What are your thoughts?
I couldn't agree more with everything you said. You look at this guy and his numbers improve day in and day out. If he doesn't suffer his injury in week 12 or week 11, whenever it was, I think you're talking about a guy who potentially is picked 4th by the Colts. People want to argue, his receivers were so wide open because of the system, all this. This is a guy who helped turn around a Tennessee program who'd been suffering in the last decade or so. They never really got over a hump that it seemed like their fan base thought that they deserved to be on. And all of a sudden, this guy comes in 2021, puts up almost 3,000 yards, 31 touchdowns, and 3 picks. You're looking at a guy who's smart with the ball. You're looking at a guy who can make plays because you're talking about the arm strength. That throw in the last seconds against Alabama to go get the field goal to win the game was an NFL throw. And he proved that he could consistently do it. I genuinely believe he doesn't get hurt. He's talked about in that top 3 because when you're talking about the leadership skills and the stuff off the field, it seemed like he had it up there with anyone else.
Yeah, if we're talking, and the thing is it's not even like, he finished his career at Virginia Tech and we're saying, well, he dropped because people just didn't see him enough nationally. He went to Tennessee. And he didn't get the respect of Virginia Tech. I would like to hope that he got it in Tennessee. But now he's the future behind Jared Goff with Detroit. And now Detroit, they got all those picks. when they gave up Matt Stafford. Now they didn't have to spend a ton of money on Hendon Hooker. They didn't have to put them in a situation where they're drafting a guy number 1 overall. They're not paying first round money to him. So here you got a guy who, by the numbers, could be your future starter for many years. You got him at a discount, and you still have Jared Goff. Not a bad bet for Detroit.
No, I think it's super interesting because you're hearing Jared Goff talks of a new contract. What is that going to look like? Because if you're a Lions fan, it's a great problem to have.
Yeah.
But at the same point, they're looking to win now. You see the way they drafted, the moves they made. I think they're, for the first time maybe ever, the clear-cut favorites in the NFC North.
Yeah.
But at the same point in time, when you are talking about the future, how long is Jared going to be there? Because if Jared plays like he did last year, are you really going to put in a guy who potentially has a pretty similar skill set to him? I mean, Jared Goff was the number 1 overall pick back in the day. It's not like he's a bum. He was in a couple bad situations. I think he's in a great situation now. I think what Detroit's doing is incredible. So I think Hendon Hooker's in a tremendous spot because especially somebody like him who had all the great praise coming into the draft, if he doesn't play in the next 3 years, someone's going to go out and try to get him because I think he's shown that he has the ability to play at a high level.
Yeah, and I think he's, of everybody we talked about, he's the most underrated, most underappreciated coming into the draft. I think when we reflect on the 2023 NFL draft, let me make a prediction here. I think we're going to talk about Hendon Hooker as one of the top 3 or top 2 quarterbacks from this draft. I'm going to say that here today.
Absolutely. I agree with you. And I think the biggest reason, other than the skill, is just where he got picked.
Yeah.
You look at the guys in the top, obviously the teams that are picking 1, 2, 3, 4, they need help. They need some pieces to come in and help them win games. Whereas Hendon Hooker's going to a team that won, 7 of their last 8 games, and had a great momentum coming into this offseason. They got a great head coach. Seems like their front office is clicking. I mean, that's a scary organization to be a part of right now. And, if anything does happen to Jared and Hendon Hooker can get healthy and play to the caliber that he can play, I mean, that's also a team that's got a tremendous amount of weapons. So there's no reason that a guy like that can't succeed day one if he's healthy.
Yeah. So Hendon Hooker, prove us right. Let's see what you got to go for this as you step forward. And, excited for all these guys. And, even though Levis I'm not sold on, you hope the best for him. You want to see the best for him. Never wish bad on a single person. This is analysis. This is looking at things, and this is trusting our guts. And at the end of the day, I hope every single one of these guys succeeds. I hope they make money for their families. I hope they have fun. I hope they do what they love and love what they do. And speaking of that, I get to do that every day, and I get to wake up in the morning, feel like I'm not working a day in my life, and get to talk to great people like Zack Mahoney. So, Zach, for analyzing the 2023 Syracuse quarterback stable and a bunch of NFL rookie quarterbacks here on Wake Up Call with Dan Tortora, I want to thank you for your time and your expertise and all the research that you did coming into this. And I would love to have you back again because this was so much fun that I looked down at the clock and said, we said 9 to 10 and it's almost 10:40. So I got to thank you for that. And I appreciate you very much for the work that you did today and going into it. And honestly, I'm just happy to have a friend and in you. And I'm coming off this conversation saying to myself, when are we going to get together and grab a drink or something? Because I haven't